Hey, what's up guys? Thank you as always for stopping by the channel. We're jumping back into the glorious 80s for another episode of my top 100 movies from the 1980s. We're closing in on the top of this list, and today we're diving into movies number 20 through 11. It's going to be a collection of iconic films featuring a bit of it all genre-wise. As always, all the synopsises for these movies will be down in the description if you're interested. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll have all the other episodes linked below as well as on the end screen for you guys to check out if you're interested. So with all the introductions complete, let's get into these 10 world-class movies from the 1980s. Coming in at number 20 is a movie about a secret contest where the world's greatest warriors fight in a battle to the death. I'm of course talking about the Jean-Claude Van Damme classic Bloodsport from 1989, directed by Newt Arnold, also starring Bolo Yeung, Donald Gibb, Leah Ayres, and a very young Forrest Whitaker. Now this was easily the movie that springboarded Van Damme to international stardom, and rightfully so, as it still holds up great today. Van Damme's very raw acting-wise in this movie, but the buffet of kumite action is plenty enough to carry the runtime. It follows a Rocky IV formula, complete with montages, and overall it's a delightfully nostalgic ride of cheesy drama, action, and righteous 80s music, and immersive on-location settings. Bolo Yeung was a great villain. He was menacing, deadly, and just, I think, the perfect opponent for Van Damme. Bloodsport didn't do anything necessarily new in the genre, but the charisma from Van Damme was undeniable, and anytime you want to port back into time to see the early days of Van Damme, Bloodsport is a winner. We're going to venture up into space for my number 19 pick. It's a movie that claimed there are some places in the universe you do not want to go alone, and that movie would of course be James Cameron's Aliens from 1986, starring Sigourney Weaver, Michael Biehn, Carrie Henn, Lance Henriksen, Bill Paxton, Jeanette Goldstein, and Paul Reiser. Now, where Alien was a methodical horror thriller, Aliens was just a full-blown action extravaganza, and it's fantastic. Aliens has a compelling plotline and just a robust group of bold characters. This movie is just much larger in scope. It truly brought something new to the screen as a sequel, and it's just filled with just great violent action and alien mayhem. But I think, I don't know, personally, what really makes this movie great is Weaver just coming into her own as Ripley to deliver one of the most just badass action lead characters in cinematic history. She keeps her human qualities and she shines as she goes head to head with the Xenomorph in a final act that is still one of the best closings you will see in a sci-fi thriller. I'm keeping it in the science fiction section for my number 18 pick. It's a movie about the future of law enforcement. He was part man, part machine, and all RoboCop from 1987, directed by Paul Verhoeven, starring Peter Weller, Nancy Allen, Ronnie Cox, Kurtwood Smith, and Ray Wise. To me, RoboCop is just a delightfully sadistic film that delivers a story that was way ahead of its time with an atmosphere you can't help but escape into. I mean, RoboCop is just a legendary character in this movie. He's dispensing one-liners and justice on all those who are preying on the city, and Peter Weller is just phenomenal in the role. This film has a fantastic hero arc to get behind as Weller becomes RoboCop, but on the other side of that coin, it has about as seedy of a collection of villains as a movie can get, with just a flat-out vile crew of cronies led by Red from that 70s show. The visual effects, I think, still hold up great today with the blend of just cutting-edge digital work at the time and top-of-the-line practical effects. Growing up, for me, this was like a horror film, and all these years later, RoboCop and its buffet of bloody carnage is still just one of a kind. Moving along to my number 17 pick, I have an action comedy about a guy who's been chased, he's been thrown through a window, and arrested. He's Axel Foley, and he's a Detroit cop on vacation in Beverly Hills. I'm of course referencing the 1984 classic Beverly Hills Cop, starring Eddie Murphy, John Ashton, Judge Reinhold, and Ronnie Cox. Arguably one of the best action comedies of all time, this movie is without question iconic because of the comedic brilliance of Eddie Murphy. He's really able to switch between comedian and action star with a seamless flow throughout this appealing storyline. I mean, structurally, this movie doesn't really break out of the mold, but the elements that it plugs in all just complement each other about as good as you can hope. This movie has a killer soundtrack, a great supporting cast, and a quick moving plotline, with Eddie Murphy just cementing it all with his quick-witted humor, just turning Axel Foley into a beloved character from the 80s. This movie really knows when to focus on the action and when to cut it with the humor, and it's a charming movie that still plays as good today as it did back in 1984. My number 16 pick comes from the mind of John Hughes. It's a movie from 1985 about 5 strangers with nothing in common except for each other, in the coming-of-age classic The Breakfast Club, starring Emilio Estevez, Molly Ringwald, Ali Sheedy, Anthony Michael Hall, and Judd Nelson. This movie is yet another example of John Hughes taking the simplest of concepts, like Saturday morning detention, and crafting it into a compelling coming-of-age tale filled with heart and emotion and humor and just waves of appealing charisma. This film almost relies primarily on the cast performances and the script, and it's an absolute delight. I mean, all these kids come from different walks of life. They all have their own insecurities and their own life events that have shaped them, and seeing these stories unfold is absolutely intriguing throughout the film. The Breakfast Club at the time was a movie that let kids know that everybody had their problems, and what may look like the perfect life to one wasn't the perfect life for the other, or it didn't mean it was free of stress. And this was just a movie that was very sincere, that explored the tumultuous years of high school to let us know that we're all in this life together, and that people shouldn't be treated differently based on social status or the way they look or where they came from. Up next at number 15, I have a movie about a machine that was sent back in time to change the future. It's of course another James Cameron classic, the sci-fi thriller The Terminator, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Linda Hamilton, and Michael Biehn. I think this movie still is a fantastic blend of sci-fi, action, thriller, and horror, and Arnold Schwarzenegger as the evil Terminator was fantastic. The scoring just creates a haunting atmosphere. This is a very ominous film that's just perfect for this wildly ambitious and fresh plotline. The cast is impressive, with Hamilton and Biehn carrying the pace, while Arnold just destroys anything in his path of finding Sarah Connor. The Terminator was like a horror movie for me as a kid, and it wouldn't have worked with anyone other than Arnold as the T-800. It's loaded with tense action as the game of cat and mouse all over LA ensues, with many memorable action moments. It's a visually appealing blend of practical and digital special effects, and it's still as awesome looking all these years later as it was back when it was made. I'm going to lighten the mood a little bit for my number 14 pick. It's a comedic classic about a prince that's just looking for his bride. Eddie Murphy is Prince Akeem, and Prince Akeem is Coming to America from 1988, directed by John Landis, also starring Arsenio Hall, James Earl Jones, John Amos, and Shari Headley. I think this is one of the most hilarious romantic comedies in film history, with a bulk of the laughs being just as good today as they were back in the 80s. Eddie Murphy is running at full comedic speed here, and Arsenio Hall is the perfect co-star. These two are just comedic gold together, but I mean, the story itself was still unique, which was actually the perfect backbone for all this wild and outrageous humor, with just frequent hilarious situations and scenarios, and a buffet of just amusing amusing side characters. I think Coming to America is never not funny, but I mean, as I said, it's still a romantic comedy as well, with the traditional love story as Akeem's trying to find his bride, which really does fuel all the actions in the story very smoothly. There are just so many memorable moments and so many quotable lines from this movie, and no nostalgia goggles are needed for this one because it's still a top-tier, creatively ambitious comedy. Next up at number 13 is a movie that had a few more lessons to share about the price of honor, the glory of friendship, and the way you fight when only the winner survives, and that would be The Karate Kid Part 2, starring, of course, Ralph Macchio and Pat Morita, as well as Tamlin Tomita, Yuji Okamoto, from director John G. Avildsen. Now, personally, this is my go-to Karate Kid movie. I just love the locations, the more adult story, and learning so much more about Mr. Miyagi and his past. This sequel to me truly did feel like it boosted the ramifications, as this time Daniel fights for honor in the face of death while being completely out of his element, because it's still very much a coming of age story, but this time it's as Daniel grows into a man. And I can't count how many times I watched this movie growing up as a kid. I can still vividly remember coming home from the theater after watching it with my life just completely changed, because I really did feel like I grew up with Daniel LaRusso, and in this movie I think Chosen and his cronies just felt much more intimidating than the Cobra Kai. The entire vibe of this movie was much more suspenseful, with much more on the line, that completely just swept me up as a kid. It's the perfect closing to part 1. It's an awesome opening to a new chapter that didn't just recycle what worked in the original. I mean, plus I gotta say, the love story in this one with Kamiko was so much better for the story, and I'm not just saying that because she was at the top of the list of my childhood crushes. Coming in at number 12 is a gangster classic from director Brian De Palma, a movie about a man who loved the American dream with a vengeance. That man was Tony Montana, but the world would know him as Scarface, from 1983, starring Al Pacino, Stephen Bauer, Robert Loggia, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio. There is no more of an iconic drug dealer than Tony Montana, and Al Pacino as Scarface is just a masterclass in acting. Brian De Palma gives this gritty tale a sexy allure as Montana works for the American dream. It has a well-structured story that weaves crime and infatuation, and there's just an undeniable atmosphere to this movie. It was loaded with excess, luxury, music, killing, and just a buffet of quotable lines. Michelle Pfeiffer, Stephen Bauer, Robert Loggia, and Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio all deliver top-notch performances to really surround Pacino effectively, and when the violence hits, it lands with just an unrelenting vengeance, capped off with a coke-fueled shootout to close the film that is still one of the best finales in the history of gangster flicks. And for my number 11 pick, I have a gritty, dark little action movie about a man who was the strong arm of the law, crime was the disease, and Sylvester Stallone was the cure in 1986's Cobra, also starring Rennie Santoni, Brian Thompson, and Stallone's wife at the time, Brigitte Nielsen, directed by George P. Cosmatos. Kinda. It's been known and routinely stated that Stallone actually directed a bulk of this dark and gritty actioner. He really was riding high off his success in '85. There was no bigger star than him at the time, and he was in full gusto, dispensing one-liners and soaking up every scene while chewing on a matchstick. It's just action movie cheese at its finest. It's no denying it's a simple story, but the sadistic group of killers, nostalgic montages, and a full-throttle final showdown make this movie just a gratuitous gem. It kicks off with an amazing grocery store intro that sets the stage for the ride of car chases, music, gunplay, and bravado that will consume this tight 87-minute runtime. It isn't one of Stallone's more well-known films, but the practical stunt work and a complete lack of self-awareness are just a joy in this movie. The body count just escalates to comical levels as Stallone goes full one-man army mode, and it closes with a satisfying one-on-one showdown that sort of encapsulates the action genre in the 80s overall. And that's it for today, guys. Easily another 10 legendary movies from the decade. Thank you all so much for watching. One more video to go and my top 100 movies from the 1980s saga will be complete. The final episodes covering films number 1 through 10 will be coming very soon. So until then, guys, thank you so much for the support. I hope you've enjoyed this video and all my videos, and I'll see you at the movies.